There are two very different types of systems in this world: the complex system and the complex adaptive system. Now, what are the differences between these two systems? A complex system is a structure which is comprised of multiple structures working together and creating a certain behavior or response in according to how a force is put on them. Now, this behavior will be quite linear, very measurable. It's not that complex usually. And a good example of a complex system or complex structure, I guess you could also say. But let's call it a complex system. A good example of this is a chair. A chair consists of the legs and the structure sitting on top of it, usually also a structure for the back where we can rest our backs on, and most people will recognize this structure and use it as something to sit on. So what then is a complex adaptive system? Because this is also a complex system. It's a structure made up of multiple structures, but there is something which is different about this system. This is adaptive, which means it can adapt to how it reacts to its environment. A chair will usually just stay being a chair until it breaks. The form won't change much. We can sit on it in a certain way, sit on it in another way, we can throw it around, but the characteristics of its behavior is it's only able to absorb a stimulus, and if it can't absorb a stimulus, it will break down. A complex system can only absorb the force which is put on them, like I said, sitting in some way or throwing it around. It can only absorb these forces. At most, it can somewhat reorganize itself internally. Let's say the fibers of the wood can somewhat change its form and then be able to keep absorbing the force from a very big guy that's sitting on this very small chair. But it's not really a conscious reaction to the force which is put on them, but it's more of somewhat a unconscious consequence of the force put on them. If the structures can't absorb these forces, it will change its form, and at some time it will decomplexify, meaning it will break apart. And a complex adaptive system is somewhat different in this, in that it is able to change internally, reorganize itself to still be able to absorb these forces. And here we come to what is really different about a complex adaptive system. Now, complex adaptive systems are what we call life, and the first smallest unit of a complex adaptive system can be the cell, which has metabolization. And now with this metabolization, it can metabolize the forces put on them. So let's say we have a chair which is made up of tissue, of cells, and we have a very small chair and a very big guy sitting on this small chair. Now, what it can do, which is different from a complex system, the complex system chair, so to say, it can metabolize and thereby excrete products, maybe enforce the fibers which are present there, the collagen fibers, which are the bulk of the structure maybe. It can adapt its form, its structures to still be able to absorb it. And when it can't deal with these forces and it can't just change with its metabolization, it will start to change either replicate the cells to be able to absorb these forces. It will become more and more and more different. It will change its form as much as it's needed to be able to adapt to the forces put on them. And if even still replication of those cells is not enough, the cells can have the option to differentiate into a different cell, which will have a different behavior, which will create a different form suitable to be able to absorb these forces. And if that still doesn't work, then it will decomplexify or break down, so to say. And how is this complex system and the complex adaptive system applied in normal life? Well, I already talked a bit about soft science and hard science in my video about why I don't lean too much onto science. I think I will show it here. In that video I already talked a bit about hard science and soft science, because there's a clear distinction between them. With complex system, it's a lot easier to measure stuff, and with complex adaptive systems, so anything which is related to life, it is very, very much more difficult to measure stuff. So this is a clear distinction or application of this concept towards real life. And what I find interesting is how does this concept apply to movement, to moving, to movement culture, movement intelligence, however you want to call it. How does this way of thinking, or this concept, complex system, complex adaptive system, apply to that? There are different ways which we use our body this day and age. There are so many different sports, so many specializations, but I guess the big one, which is very popular, is just the gym, which is very broad, but it shows the typical, the archetype gym goer, which is doing dumbbells or heavy squats, very bilateral. And with this way of moving, for me at least, it looks more as a complex system would move. It's usually the same movements over and over again. Of course, we have a complex adaptive system, so our body will adapt with metabolization and the whole list I just told you towards these movements. But the movements themselves, they are not that varied. They don't truly challenge us as a complex adaptive system. And why do I say that? Because if we really want to be challenged as a complex adaptive system, the word adaptive needs to be more integrated in the way of our moving. What usually happens is we find our niche. We like the gym, we like to tennis, we like to do yoga, we like to, golf, these things. We usually identify ourselves with the sport also, where we go to how we train our body. And there's nothing wrong with this inherently, but if we want to challenge ourselves with the concept of us being a complex adaptive system, it can be much more interesting to vary the impulses, the forces which we put on our body. So we don't only train to become better at tennis, we don't only train to grow bigger muscles, or we don't only train to look a certain way. We train to be able to adapt to different situations. So instead of only tearing our muscles and rebuilding new muscle tissue, we also adapt to coordination or proprioception, or speed, or suppleness, fluidity, or power, or unilaterality, or whatever. And now I'm thinking of this, I already kind of mentioned this in my video about the dangers of specialization. Again, I'll show it here. In this video I talk about what the consequence can be if we only focus on a certain way of moving and kind of neglect other ways of moving, or should I say more fundamentally, other quality of forces which we can induce on our body and adapt to. There are consequences if we only expose our body to the same types of forces. In my opinion, to really potentiate our body, our abilities as a complex adaptive system, it can be really interesting to start to introduce other qualities of forces on our body. Like I said, suppleness, coordination, this list that I just told you, it's not only to these qualities, it certainly extends to more and more, but it goes to show that there are a lot of ways which we can expose our body to certain forces and our body can adapt towards them and then be a more adaptable body. Now, of course, this also will have consequences, because if we specialize less, we won't excel in a certain direction. Let's say if you really want to become a world-class tennis player, you will need to specialize to some degree, and this will make you more fragile. And if you want to know why, you can watch that video I just told you about. But I think most people just want to be healthy and feel good in their body. And I think we all have this physical, structural body, and it's so interesting of what it's capable to do. And I feel it's just for most people to spark some passion into the unknown of what it is capable of, what it can adapt to, what it can potentially be, and the feelings that will also come to the surface with certain breakthroughs, things you couldn't do before and then can do later, in a way adapting to those new forces or different environments which it is exposed to. It is really interesting, and I also feel this concept really truly integrates in the concept of just health in general, because health is also such a speculative term. So morph well, be well, and I'll see you in the next one.